Guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. Today on episode 186, we are talking about reading. Let's untangle it. Hi, I'm Hillary Erickson, the curly head behind the Pulling Curls podcast, Pregnancy and Parenting Untangled. There's no right answer for every family, but on this show, we hope to give you some ideas to make life simpler at your house. Life's tangled, just like my hair. Today's guest is the head behind Reading Simplified. She was a teacher in middle school and realized that her kids in her classroom were just not reading. And so she has come up with a movement of her own. She has so many good tips for reading. I want to introduce today's guest, Marnie Ginsberg. Are you overwhelmed by all there is to do around your house? As a new mom, I felt overwhelmed at every turn. Fortunately, I turned to systems to make a change. Whether it's mornings, dinner time, or even just to climb out of a pile of kids' clothes, my course Family Routines can save you. I hold your hand as we smooth out these rough patches, making every day easier so we can more easily handle when your preschooler tells you they can use their urine like a lightsaber. Parenting is always going to be a wild ride. Routines are just your seatbelt, and they can support you. Use coupon code UNTANGLED to save 15% at checkout. Link in the show notes. Hey, Marnie, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, Hillary. Thank you.
Now, this is a topic I am super passionate about. I loved teaching my kids reading because I'm weird like that. I always thought one of them would not be into it, but all of my kids, all three, just loved all that early reading stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So my big question for you, because I read a lot online, is that it doesn't actually end up helping them long term, but I feel like it does because my kids have been really good academically as well.
Right.
What do you think? Or what do the studies show?
That early reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is mixed research on it. And I think that's because the child development is just so variable, multivariable. But we do have a very well-known study that has been widely cited from the 80s about the Matthew effects. And this leading researcher adopted this idea of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew that the rich get richer. And that's how And since then, other research studies have validated that when you get off to a good start, learning how to crack the code, then you read more and you like it because you're confident. And then you read more, then you learn how to recognize words better. And then you even get a better vocabulary. And so this is just a positive snowball that does indeed start very early. In fact, we know that those kids that in his study, this Matthew effects paper, those kids that got to the end of first grade that had already figured out the foundational skills, they were going to have high achievement in school. It was pretty, not a one-to-one relationship, but a very strong correlation. And we also have contrary studies showing that if kids do not read by the end of first grade well, it's highly likely, in fact, 9 out of 10 times they won't read well in fourth grade and maybe beyond. And those are devastating scenarios for children. Your self-identity, self-concept, your motivation for school. You cannot learn as well from all the other areas of school because reading is the backbone of all academic learning. And so we see high correlations between those on welfare and low literacy rates, those in the prison system with low literacy. So getting off to a early good start is such a protective factor for a child. And unfortunately, in the US and in most English-speaking countries, we've been kind of led astray in how we're supposed to teach reading. Most teachers have been given misinformation about how kids learn to read. And so a lot of children struggle unnecessarily in those early days. I recommend a podcast that just came out. It's just 6 episodes by an award-winning journalist. And the podcast is called Sold a Story. And it talks about how teachers and publishers and even university teacher prep have misled people in what we know about how the brain learns to read. And so as a result, a lot of kids struggle early on. So your audience of parents needs to be aware of the challenges. Of course, there's certainly bright lights in places, but there are challenges that many kids face in schools because many teachers have tools that are highly ineffective. And in fact, over 65% of US fourth graders are not proficient in reading.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And I bet that's gone down since COVID.
Well, yeah, the number of lacking proficiency has gone up. It just came out last month, and the data was not good across the board for the most part. So,
I mean, a few thoughts just on what you said so far. I think reading, obviously, I think it's best taught one-on-one. It makes it so hard in the classroom. So I've done a lot of reading intervention at school just as a PTA mom, and agree seeing those kids that are just struggling so hard. I've seen them go, through all the grades now that I have kids that have graduated high school, and you do see them struggle. But in general, those are the kids that are struggling in all areas. They're also struggling in math. Not always the case. Sometimes your brain just works in a specific way, but so that's hard. But also socioeconomic status, like if mom, dad are never home because they're just trying to put food on the table, that makes it really hard for kids to learn. So there's a lot of factors on all these studies.
That's true. But researchers have shown that as few as 2 to 5% of kids should actually struggle if they're given high quality research-based interventions, at least in terms of recognizing those words. Then we have another level of skill that needs to develop over a lifetime, which is just learning the background knowledge so you can be a good reader, because being a good reader is highly associated with knowing a lot of stuff. So I can pick up this article from the New York Times about something in physics, and I don't know much about physics, but I know enough to be able to comprehend it. But if I haven't had that background knowledge, I'm at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
So that is a lifelong thing. And it can be often, although not, of course, universally, that those who are in communities or families in poverty, that they have less access to acquiring that kind of background knowledge. So it's, again, really important for the school to take on these issues of let's get the kids cracking the code, and then let's fill up their minds with lots of knowledge about the world systematically.
Yeah. Well, hopefully colleges are going to start teaching teachers, or there's going to be training to hopefully adjust it. But my listeners tend to not be teachers. Well, maybe
no, I know, but I just want folks to know about it, because a lot of folks assume that the schools can take care of their child with reading, and certainly that works many, many times, but it's not working for a majority of our students right now.
Yeah.
So we have to get involved.
I will say I never relied on our teachers to teach my kids reading because they were reading before they went to school. And so I was like, if you could fix them in other areas, that would be awesome.
Please. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Okay. So what can parents be doing to support kids well, first off, what age do you recommend starting these activities with your kids?
That also is kind of widely variable in the research, because learning to read is really a cultural accomplishment. So it has to do with what the family chooses, what the community, what the nation emphasizes. There are some countries that don't start reading instruction until 7, and that's it's verboten to do it before then. But Montessori schools have been doing beginning reading instruction for over 100 years around age 3. And I actually kind of like, especially for the preschool age, to adopt Maria Montessori's mantra, which is follow the child. So some children are really not very interested at 2 or 3, and sometimes even 4, in learning the letter sounds or sitting down to read a book. And so as a parent, we have to adjust to what they're interested in, because yes, we want to provide them the skills, but we also want them to have a positive perspective on reading and a positive emotional bond with us as they think about reading. So we want to, balance the two ends. It's a tension, because it can be challenging to get started with reading. So I would think that when the child was 4, it would be wise to ensure that they're learning their letter sounds and they're beginning into the alphabetic principle, which is this concept that our written language is a code for sound. So one easy way to do that is, as you're sitting with them and reading any book that they really enjoy, draw your finger along the print and make sure that each time you tap a word, you're speaking that word, and then occasionally show them the alphabetic principle implicitly by dragging out the sounds in the word. So the mom sat down on the sofa And so you're just kind of hinting at, hey, those sounds that are coming out of my mouth, those relate to those squiggles on the page. That is the first insight to help with the alphabetic principle. And then occasionally, maybe even ask them. The mom sat on what's that first sound? While you're pointing at it, and maybe they can come up with, and so you're easing them into it. And so that when kids come to kindergarten, if they know their letter sounds and they can hear some sounds and words, this is a very important early skill that's called phonemic awareness. That perception of just what I gave an example of. Can you break off the s at the beginning of sofa? That doesn't come naturally. And it's really an accomplishment that comes through reading instruction. So letter sounds and that early phonemic awareness is so important for preparing kids to be ready for kindergarten. And I think there's certainly no harm in making sure that your kids are reading by kindergarten. That would be like an enrichment and accelerated option. But many, many kids are perfectly capable of that. And if they resist, then give it a month. If they're 2, 3, or 4, and pick it up again, or do it in 5-minute bursts, make it a game. And then over time, they will be more than well prepared for kindergarten.
Yeah. I wanted to speak to because I, with my first kid, I was like, I don't know what to do with him. So I just kind of did things that were fun. Now, one of the things that I think is underutilized by a lot of parents is the library, because it is so free.
And so fun.
Yeah. I mean, besides the whole lost library book phenomenon, which is an opportunity cost of going to the library. Right. But that's also teaching your kids responsibility. Like we have a special spot where library books go. So that's a lesson but just taking kids to the library, there is always something at the library that little kids are interested in. Older teens, less so.
Right. Yeah, they may have puppet shows. They'll have the read aloud, just looking at the books. Yeah, if anything that we can do as parents to help the child identify as a reader,
yes,
is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, when COVID hit, my daughter wanted to buy some books at Barnes & Noble. I tell you what, I went every time she asked. I could have bought those books at the library. I mean, I could have checked them out at the library, but it was first of all, the libraries were closed. So it was like an outing. I wanted to nurture, this is a relationship, mom and daughter are going to have a good time, and we're going to go pick what you want within reason. And it was really beneficial. And she actually kind of started reading again after a little slump that happened when a teacher told her she had to read only up to her ability level. And she was like 3rd or 4th grade, and she wasn't really interested in middle school novels, even though she was capable. And that was a bummer. So this kind of revived it. And she's been reading ever since. The point is, the libraries, even though I mentioned going to the bookstore, the libraries are priceless, as you say. And again, follow the child. What are they interested in? Yeah, some of the time we want them to be exposed to great literature. But if they want to read these silly books in a series that you're tired of, just try to strengthen yourself and keep doing it, because if they're enjoying it, you're on the right track.
Good old Captain Underpants.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times the nonfiction section is underutilized by moms of little kids, because you don't have to read every word that's on that page about spiders. But if your kid loves spiders, then get the book, look at the pictures, just talk about it. I think, and might I remind you that it is so free. I think a lot of parents are like, well, books are expensive. I don't want to buy a ton on Amazon. And I'm like, don't buy any. Like, buy some books. You obviously want books at your house. And when they're little, because they eat the books, you need to have your own books. But it's so much easier to organize books that aren't yours that just go back to the library. So a huge fan of that.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, many of us tend to be a fiction reader or a nonfiction reader. And then whatever our default is, then we unintentionally pass that on to the child by just not exposing them. So be more than willing to branch out into other genres, and particularly nonfiction, because again, that's where the kids are going to get the most knowledge of the world, which will help them succeed in so many areas of life and become a better reader.
Yeah. I had largely ignored nonfiction books until I had a kid at school, when one of the teachers was like, how often do you go into the nonfiction section? And I was like, what? I'm so sorry.
Where's that?
I've just been focusing on the Thomas the Tank Engine books. So, and the other thing was, we just made it so much fun at our house. Like, it was just part of our day. Like, we had a letter puzzle. We would hide the letters around the house, and then we would make the sounds. Like, there are a lot of really fun activities that you can do. There was never a point in time where I was like pushing my kids into reading, but we extended that into, we would be in the car and I would be like, cat. And it would
Love
be a
it.
guessing game of like, what
Yeah.
is that word that mom just sounded out? Because my first one had a really hard time sounding out letters. And so there are going to be bumps in the road. I just want to say, as you're teaching your kids to read, that's totally normal. And every
Right.
kid is really different, I find, amongst my three. They each struggled with something different.
Yeah, I love how you were doing that phonemic awareness preparation, basically, and also revealing the alphabetic principle. Maybe just drawing those sounds out, cat, or what word am I saying? It, and that's
Yeah.
going to help them with blending, which is the first step in on their decoding process.
So, these are fun things that you can do in the car. I
Mhm.
think the problem is a lot of times moms just don't know these fun things that you can easily incorporate into your day. We had tons of sticker books. I'm totally the sticker book mom. And so there's a
If it
lot of
works, yeah.
letter sticker books out there that you could just, while you're putting the A sticker on, you go, And I was like, well, I'm not a professional. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. That's what I would
Mm.
think as a mom. It turns out you can't really do it all that wrong, I guess.
Yeah, for those kids, most kids are going to pick it up fairly easy when they have that type of enrichment. But a lot of children also still struggle. They may have some learning difficulties. They may even have dyslexia. And so they may need more intense help. And also, that might show up as, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And that alone for sure is not a single warning factor. But if they're not interested, you might, again, need to be more creative, get some help. But I love what you're saying. I mean, how many different, if you can't think of a game, like what can you hide? How many different ways can you hide something where they have to go seeking that, outside, inside, that you can hide a letter, or you can hide words, you can hide sentences, and like a scavenger hunt, you find the first thing and then that will tell you where to go to get the next thing. And each time, of course, they have to read the sentence.
Right.
I've seen a really fun video of a parent taping words on the wall and a kid shooting them with a Nerf gun.
Oh, that's awesome.
But just take whatever your kids enjoy and put a word or a letter sound in front of them.
Yeah. Two of the other activities my kids really like, we used to, there's the bread tags that like close your bread. It's a
Yes.
plastic tag. Anyway, they all fit together. Like I read this in some books. So you could write and again, we were poor. So you could write the letters on the bread tags and then they could try and fit them together, kind of like a word puzzle. But
Oh,
again,
my
the poor
goodness,
man's
that's
word
clever.
puzzle. So that
Yeah.
was kind of a fun way to do it, and they can put together sounds that don't really go together. Right.
Right. Practicing, and then they can make, is this a real word or not? And that's the game.
Yeah.
You could use pebbles or stones too
Yeah.
for writing with a, Sharpie.
Yeah. And we used to I would give my kids a highlighter, which was generally a mom tool, and they could go with a piece of
Ooh.
newspaper and highlight all the A's, right?
Fun.
So there really are, I think a lot of times we think of it as drudgery because it sort of is. Like when you do reading intervention at the school, it is a little bit drudgery.
Yeah,
as a
especially
parent.
if they didn't, because back to the earlier question, they didn't get off to a good start. And
Right.
so there's that lack of motivation, the sense of failure, and it happens quickly. Even in kindergarten, kids start to recognize, wait a minute, I'm not picking this thing up as easily as everybody else. And they all know that reading is the main activity at school and they're desperate to do it. So yeah, that's why even though there's mixed opinions in the reading world about starting early, if you can, again, follow the child, I think you're so much better off that way, to give them a good start so that they have positive emotions about it and they have at least solid skills entering kindergarten.
Yeah. And I've seen so many kids pick it up so well in kindergarten and first grade, just with seeing the other kids. There's a good amount of peer pressure at school.
Yes.
So don't feel like all is lost if your kid is entering kindergarten or first grade, because it's such a magical time too. When your kids suddenly pick up reading, it is a whole new world when all of a sudden they're like, that sign says stop. And
Right.
you're like, yes, that's why I'm stopping.
Well, maybe I could just give a little framework for your listeners.
Yeah.
Because I think most people have kind of got the idea, well, you're going to teach the alphabet. Okay. Yes. And I actually prefer to teach the letter sounds, at least first, primary, because that is what helps you decode a word. If you look at the word CAT and you say the letter sounds, CAT does not sound anything like the actual, word itself, cat. So knowing that the letter C is K, if you do that first, it will help lay the groundwork for the first step of cracking the code and decoding learning. It also helps with the secondary thing that I really emphasized earlier, the alphabetic principle. Like, do they get that those little squiggles are codes for sound? And then, so letter sound knowledge, the alphabetic principle, and then the third one, the phonemic awareness, the perception of those sounds and words. Can they break apart the word sit into it? And can they put it back together when they hear the sound separately? If you build those 3 skills into your toddler and preschool experience, along with reading and enjoying books, they will be set.
Yeah. I've talked to a couple of occupational therapists for 0 to 3 lately on the podcast. And it's just like when you start to feel insane as a mom, because you're like, here we go. We're going to go do the laundry. What do you think's in the laundry today? What kind of colors are we going to find? And you're like, I am romper room, right? I would look at myself and just be like, I need a new life, right? Because you're just constantly talking. You're constantly like trying to build up these skills. And it's just a constant effort, I think. And if you can build like letters and letter sounds into it, it can really be fun. And again, when your kids learn how to read, it is pure magic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch.
Yeah. So big props to the moms out there teaching kids to read. And you can't expect the school to just do it, because it is a one-on-one principle. And obviously our teachers, 20 kids in a kindergarten class.
Right.
It's too hard.
Back to the Montessori idea. My kids went through that. And I think just the format of it is genius, because a typical classroom is ages 3 to 6 or 3 to 5. Not sure. But so that means that in any given year, about a third of the class is learning to read. So the teacher can sit with those children and give them more intensive feedback, which is one of the most important things we can do. Once our students get started with cracking the code, then the best thing that they can do is practice with us supporting them with a lot of encouragement and also specific tips. So if they read the word cat as Kate, you just tap the A and say, yes, it could be, but in this word, what else could it be? So you give them a little cue, but make them do the work unless they're super frustrated. And that's the feedback that not only helps them with the word cat, but then that's like a generative thing that will help them with so many other words and so many other phonics patterns. And so, yeah, whether it's one-on-one with a mom or dad or a caregiver or in a small group at school, that is that's like the highest leverage activity we have at our disposal to help them become a good reader. And sadly, it doesn't happen as much as it probably should, both at school and sometimes at home. I think we probably should say, related to this whole topic, that the screens are the enemy to becoming a good reader. It's a totally different world than when we grew up. The books were the most exciting thing, and even I'm old enough, like sometimes there was literally nothing on TV. We don't have that situation anymore. So if parents can put pretty firm boundaries on how much time kids have with a device, so that they don't expect the world to come at them in 3-second intervals nonstop, then they will have the attention span to cope with a longer story or to cope with the hard work of sounding things out, because at first it can be hard work. If the kids are prepared well, they don't necessarily feel like it's that hard work because they're so excited. They know they're off to the races. But if they have anything that's gotten in the way, and then, like you said, with the intervention, it becomes quite a struggle. And so you need to adjust and play games and do things to make it fun and inspiring.
Yeah. The good thing about screens is, though, there are some fun apps where they teach letter sounds. So you can, because we're all going to have screen time, moms. I hear you. Yeah. I mean, the electric company taught me to read, probably, right?
That's cool. Yeah. I have a collection on my YouTube channel of the different electric company in Between the Lions and Sesame Street videos that I've cultivated to, like, if you're going to teach the O sound, you could go and watch these videos. So yeah, definitely use technology wisely. The app Grapho game has been researched many times and has been demonstrated to be a pretty easy way for kids to learn the letter sounds. And another one that I really like relates to a game that I play called Switch It. But the app that is similar to this game, which helps with cracking the code, is called What's Changed. And so kids are exposed to maybe cat again. I'm really beating this cat down. Let's change cat to sat, and then change sat to sit, and then change sit to pit and pit to pot. So maybe even getting over to changing that last letter, pot to pop, so that comparison of single changes really zeroes in the child's mind to notice both the phonemic awareness and the letter sound knowledge. And that kind of contrasting activity really accelerates kids' reading really quite rapidly. So we do it with apps, but we also play it with just little letter sound cards on a board with lines at the bottom. So they're dragging the correct letter sound card onto the right line in the position of the word. And you don't need anything fancy, just cut up a little index card and put one sound on each card. So like the SH in show would be on one card because it's one sound, which relates to how our code works. It's a code for sounds.
Yeah. There's so many fun ways. And I think the importance is to make it fun. Find what's fun for your kids. So even if the only thing that's fun is going to the library and finding books about football or trucks, then do that. Right?
Yes.
Because eventually those are all the baby steps that everyone else is using. I think a lot of parents feel like they're behind, but doing the fun things will eventually bring good stuff.
Yeah. And if you're feeling behind, like I can't read aloud today, pull out an audiobook, which could be something free that you access on the internet. It could be easily accessible things from the library. And that is a great way to get the extra enrichment, expose them to higher level of language, written language. Most kids can handle at least 2 grade levels above their current age in terms of comprehension. So like a typical kindergartner, I wouldn't want to just read aloud to them something that's considered a kindergarten book. They could probably easily handle a 2nd or 3rd grade novel or book about planes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And they can listen to it.
Oh man, we loved the books on tape at our house. We had the old Disney kind. Parents out there, come on, you remember the little chime as you'd read like the 3 Little Pigs. Anyway, I just want parents to think about like fun ways that they can introduce learning and honestly get learning even in like my middle schooler during COVID. We didn't go to the library. We didn't really buy a lot of books. And so sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, the library. We need to reintegrate that back into our lives.
Yeah.
Because it used to be such a big part of our lives.
Right.
And then it was
same.
gone.
Yeah. They just shut it down completely in where I was living at the time.
We could request books, but I found that kids were kind of I was like, do you want to request one? And she was like, what am I going to request? And I was like,
you got to go look. You don't have your favorite author at that point when you're 5 or 7.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming on, Marnie. Where can people find you?
Well, head over to readingsimplified.com. And if you look for that, the first button, you'll see an opportunity to download that Switch It game. So the game that pairs the contrasts the letter sound. So a lot of folks might enjoy that. It'll help anyone with early on who's trying to crack the code. And it also helps older students who are struggling with cracking the code. Readingsimplified.com.
Okay. Awesome. And your YouTube channel's on there too? Because I thought that playlist with all the PBS stuff.
Yeah, that would be at youtube.com/@ Reading Simplified.
Like the at symbol or
the at symbol. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. youtube.com/ the @ symbol Reading Simplified. All one word.
Yeah. We all just got handles on YouTube.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Marnie.
It's my treat, Hillary. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I don't know if you've listened to my episode that I did, I think last month, on things I did that other parents hate, but there are so many fun ways to integrate letters into your day with your kids. And just talking about letter sounds when you're in the car, it's really easy to point out letters. So honestly, I think if you just make letters part of your day with little kids, it will slowly become more part of your day. You're not really teaching reading, you're just having fun together. And I know as a parent, you're trying to find ways to talk with your kids or integrate them into the world around them. And learning letters is a great way to do it. So hopefully this gave you guys some ideas. If you have questions for Marnie or you have some thoughts on the podcast about like what your kids struggled with, come on over and tell us on Instagram. I will have a post about this episode and we would love to chat with you more. Stay tuned for our pregnant mamas. We are talking about what the hospital does to prevent things from going wrong with you. And the next week, we're having some talk about girl bosses and why we don't support each other. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. The Pulling Curls podcast grows when you share us on social media or leave a review. If you do, please tag us so that we can share and send you a virtual hug, which frankly is my favorite kind of hugging. Until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.